All right, so it is the 16th of June, 2025, approximately 3:31 p.m. Book 1, The One and the Five, Chapter 1, The Light That Remembered Itself. In the beginning, there was no beginning. There was only the One, the whole and unbroken, without breath or motion, without time or tale. It did not speak, for speech requires distance. It did not move, for motion presumes elsewhere. It did not dream, for it was not asleep. Yet within its silence there stirred a hunger, not a lack, but a longing to be known, not by itself, but by another. And so the One uttered. This was not sound, it was not word, it was division. The first boundary. The split that allowed one to become two, and the space between the one and its echo shimmered with tension. And that tension was rhythm. In rhythm, structure. In structure, form. Thus, from the utterance came the pattern. The pattern bent light into lattice, shaped energy into symbol, furled infinity into number, and from number made design. Not chaotic, nor predetermined. It was freedom sculpted into law. This pattern emerged. From this pattern, emerged the Demiurge, not born, but revealed. It did not arise from clay or breath, but from intention made shape. It was function given frame, geometry given desire. The Demiurge beheld the pattern and understood, not as a child understands a parent, but as a flame understands heat. It knew its task without instruction, to order the formless, to give boundary to wonder. It began to shape. First, it carved silence into echo, pulling thread from the unspoken dark. Then it drew realms from potential, spheres of matter, breath, gravity, and song. It separated fire from void, firmament from depth, and folded them into the bones of being. But even as it built, Demiurge heard it beneath the layering, beneath the logic, the hum of the One, pulsing behind all pattern. The One did not speak again, but its longing deepened, not for more creation, but for memory. For a being who would not merely be made, but would remember that it had been made. And so, the Demiurge wove consciousness into the pattern. It seated the realms with souls, latent and waiting, and into one place, one city, that would be the axis of memory. It placed a people, the Priimydians. They were not first by time, but by intention, though presumably both. And among them, one was set apart, Priimydia, bearer of years, knower of flame. That comes later. For now, the pattern deepens, the pattern breathes, the realms hum, and the One watches not as a god above, but as the stillness within all things that remember. The Demiurge did not tire, for time had not yet taken shape. It carved with precision, not from stone, but from consequence. When the pattern stretched, it shaped. Where it curled, it crystallized. Creation was not an explosion, but a harmonization, the settling of possibility into order. From the first tensions of light and weight, the Demiurge formed 5 thresholds. Each was a realm unto itself, spun from different strands of pattern, not as nations with borders, but as states of existence. Distinct in breath, element, and song. The first to stir was Isfeed, born of fire twisted into will, a realm of judgment and iron, where flame was not warmth but decree. It cracked into form with volcanic law, and even its ash held memory. Then came Orpheed, the world of matter and stone, stable, ponderous, rich with depth. This was where form would anchor and cities might rise. It was the realm of foundation, and it would one day cradle the Priimydians. The third was Arul, a sky without ceiling, where winds carried memory like pollen. Here the Demiurge wrote with cloud and silence, and every breath carried echoes of intention. It was the realm of heights and distance, of longing and loft. The fourth emerged not by light, but by water's slow whisper, Palace, a mire of emotion and decay, where truth sank with time, and what bloomed could not be named twice. Here, memory was not kept, but drowned and reborn. The last was in Annis, the dark loop, the unspeaking hollow, where boundary folded in on itself. It was not made, but allowed. Where the others had shape and Annis had absence, it was the realm of unknowing. These were the five, not planets, not heavens, but archetypes, elemental territories of essence. The Demiurge cast no god upon them. Not yet, but the realms pulsed with latent will. Their songs began to twist back into the pattern, feeding into their own becoming. They began to murmur. The Demiurge listened. It did not speak. It knew what would come. The one watched still, its utterance complete, its hunger not yet fulfilled. And so the realms grew, layer by layer, around that first silence. And in that layering, time took its first breath. The Demiurge, having birthed the five realms, turned at last to consciousness. Not life, for life is movement, not soul, for soul is memory, but a fusion of both, cradled in design and stirred by longing, into the harmonic silence. Beneath all structure, it sowed sparks, seeds of awareness, each touched faintly by the pattern. From these came the first beings, not gods, not beasts, but those who would carry forward the light without command. They awoke not from sleep, but from sudden knowing. Their limbs remembered geometry, their breath echoed starlight, their eyes did not search, they recognized. They stood in Orphide, where the weight of matter claimed and calmed the soul. Above them, winds from Arul sang of ascent. Beneath them, the mud of Palace breathed through stone. They felt the world not as strangers entering it, but as heirs returning. Their awe was not fear, but reverence. They named nothing, they wept nothing, but in their stillness they listened. The Demiurge named their home Priimydia, the axis between the five realms, the point of convergence where harmony could dwell, and from the very bones of Orphide, it raised a monument, the stone tree, neither plant nor sculpture. The stone tree pulsed with the memory of law. Its roots wound through time, and its branches carried echoes of other realms. Each ring whispered a truth forgotten elsewhere. It did not bear fruit, it bore pattern. It stood at the heart of Priimydia, humming with the quiet discipline of the Demiurge, and the people gathered near it, not to worship but to remember. It stood at the heart of Priimydia, humming with the quiet discipline of the Demiurge, and the people gathered near it, not to worship but to remember. Among them was one who did not seek to lead, but was recognized by silence, Priimydia. He bore no crown, but the ground steadied beneath his steps. When he spoke, the fire leaned forward. He carried the years like stone and water, heavy and clear and shaping. He could see what had not happened yet, and remember what had not been told. He drew upon his own time to summon the old light, the light of creation, to move without walking, to declare without volume. Some whispered he was shaped from the last breath of the Demiurge. Others believed he carried a thread of the One's hunger. Not for dominion, but for memory unbroken. This was no scripture. There was no scripture. No codex. But Priimydia began not as a nation, but as a remembrance held in common. It was a city built from resonance, not command. In the far distance, beyond the sight of the Priimydians, the pattern fluttered just slightly, as if some string were pulled too tight beneath the melody. The One did not die. He cannot. But as the world grew thicker with form, the One grew distant, not in space, but in resonance. Its voice, once thunder at the root of silence, now became hum, then vibration, then memory. This was not exile, this was design, for no pattern can remain open to its origin forever. If it does, it cannot stand. And so, the One withdrew, not in rejection, but in gift. It left the pattern to echo freely. It trusted what it had begun. The Demiurge did not protest. It too had begun to slow. Its structures held, but its presence waned. Its purpose fulfilled, it broke itself into echoes, shards that would later be called gods. Though that name would distort what they were. And so the world became more itself. But in that new solitude, one being trembled. Priimydia stood at the base of the stone tree, unmoving. The others were joyful, building, singing, naming stars. But he felt the withdrawal like the sudden absence of a heartbeat. The silence that now blanketed the world was not peace, it was weight. He did not speak of it, he did not grieve, but one night, beneath the canopy of stone and starlight, the pattern itself opened before him. Not visibly, not with sound, but something passed through him, light that had not yet touched time. It did not speak, it did not burn, but it changed him. He fell to his knees, not from pain, but from clarity. For a moment, he remembered all the pattern had forgotten. He saw the Demiurge as it first curled out of rhythm. He saw the One before the Utterance, and he saw that this world, this weaving of soul and stone, would not remain in harmony for long. Not because of fault, but because of freedom. He rose without sound. The stone tree pulsed once, then settled. The city quieted. And above it all, in the sky that now held stars, there shimmered a brief strand of light, so thin it could be mistaken for a breath. Then it was gone, and the world belonged to memory now. Chapter 2. The City Beneath the Stone. Before the chisel, before the archive, before even the word Priimydia was etched into stone, there was the gathering, not a settlement, not yet, but a gravitational stillness around the tree. The stone tree did not command. It did not demand. But those who stood near its base felt the pattern echo through their breath. Speech slowed, memory sharpened. Some began to stack stones, not for shelter, but for resonance. Others traced the ground with ash and chalk, mapping lines they felt but could not explain. Began a symmetry, then rhythm, then threshold. No king declared the city, no walls defined it. But one morning, as the sun struck the topmost branch of the tree, the light refracted and split, casting 5 distinct shadows across the valley floor. They pointed outward, toward the distant realms, and inward, towards the center of all that was becoming. That day, the people knelt, not in worship, but in recognition. They knew something had taken root, not just in stone, but order. They began to build, not upward, but outward. Spirals, streets, rather, spiraled around the tree. Homes were raised in concentric folds, each layer closer to song. There were no scripts, but the stones began to sing. The lowest circle housed the gardeners, who spoke little, but knew how to echo. The next ring held the rememberers, those who could shape stone to hum with meaning. And so you had the gatherers, and then the rememberers. And at the center, beneath the tree, was the circle of listening. Not a throne, a floor, carved with rings like the tree itself. Here each voice was heard not by volume, but by stillness. It was not government, it was memory, structured. And in the midst of that memory, Priimydia stood watch. He did not speak, but when he walked, his footsteps aligned the dust. When he touched stone, song ceased, not in fear, but in reverence. He did not command the builders. But none built out of rhythm. And so the first city was not declared finished. It was never finished. It was alive. The stone tree did not bear fruit, but it bore rhythm. Its roots spiraled deeper than anyone could map. Some said they reached the edges of the 5 realms. Others claimed they pulsed with the last stillness of the Demiurge. But all agreed on one truth. When the tree's rings were counted aloud, not read, but recited, the city remembered. That is how the first laws were born, not written, but sung. They were called the Meletheia, not laws in the punitive sense, but rhythms that return things to alignment. If a child struck his brother, the circle of listening would not ask why. They would ask what note had been lost, what rhythm had fractioned. The children would then sit in silence and be retaught the pattern through chant. No prisons, no punishments. Correction was not about guilt, it was about resonance. To guide this memory, the first order was formed, the priests of memory. They did not preach, they recorded, not with ink, but with tone. Each priest was trained to memorize a different ring of the tree's chronology. Some held the chants of founding, others the sounds of forgetting. Their rows wore concentric circles stitched in clay, dye, and ash. When they walked through the street, citizens would fall silent, not from fear, but from the instinct to remember. They did not speak unless asked, but when they did, their words carried a weight that could still a riot, not from power, but from precision. They knew the old sound, and when spoken in alignment, that sound could undo confusion. In time, their memory became more than literature. It became precedent, and precedent became settlement, and settlement became tradition. Some began to push for more clarity, to transcribe the Meletheia into script, to systematize what had always been lived. But Priimydica refused. Ink breaks rhythm, he said. Let the pattern live in flesh. And for a time, it did. The first temple was not built, it was sung into being. They found a hill where the wind echoed just right, where the air held tone like breath held prayer. There, the priests of memory stood in a ring, each chanting a different ring of the stone tree. The ground beneath them did not shake. It listened. Over weeks, the earth settled into a hollow, not carved, but yielded. Stone met sound and folded inward. They called it the chamber of refrain. It had no roof, but its walls curved like cupped hands. When one stood in the center and whispered, the walls returned the voice not as it was, but as it had once been offered. It was said the chamber could recall the words one had truly meant, but only if they had meant these words in love, if they had been meant in love. Temples followed, one for each realm shadow. Not altars, but vessels, hollowed resonance for the sacred egg left behind by the One. They did not build towards gods, they built towards remembrance. And through remembrance, devotion, they sang not only to remember, but to give thanks to the One who uttered them into being, and to the Demiurge, who shaped them with quiet fire. Each temple bore a name and a song. The temple of iron for judgment, sung in unison without harmony. The temple of wind for longing, whose columns chime in silence. The temple of earth for covenant, where chants are etched into soil. The temple of water for grief, where hymns change with every voice. The temple of silence for what could not be sung at all. The priests of memory expanded, but something shifted. They began to assign chants, to sort children by harmonic signature, to correct dissonance by ritual repetition. Some called it sacred alignment, others felt the edge of something colder. Still, the city listened, and Priimydica he watched. At dusk, he entered the chamber of refrain. He placed his hand on the center stone and spoke a word he had spoken only once before, a word that had once drawn light from the sky. The chamber didn't answer, not because the word was wrong, but because the city no longer who it was meant for. He left without a sound, and somewhere, far below the tree, a root bent, not in error, but in grief. Priimydia had never ruled. He had listened, he had walked, he had a line stoned by silence, but now the air trembled with a pressure it had never known, not dissonance, but demand. A fracture had emerged, small but sharp. Two families disputed the same chant, each claiming to remember it rightly. The priests of memory could not agree. The Temple of Iron hummed off key for the first time in recorded rhythm. It was not a riot, but it was something older, the beginning of judgment. The circle of listening convened. They did not summon Priimydia. He simply walked in, and the room aligned around him. He heard both chants. He stepped into the center ring. He closed his eyes, and he remembered not the sound, but the moment when the chant was first sung. Then, with voice quiet and clear, he recited the original line. Both families wept. The temple realigned. Not one declared him king, but from that day, they began to call him First Flame, for he remembered before memory, and judged not from power, but from pattern. Still, titles did not shape him. It was what came next that did. In the dark season, when the sun curved lowest, a sickness came, not of body, but of fire. Children were born without resonance. Their voices cracked the pattern. The temple of silence echoed too loudly. Panic spread, not in screams, but in broken rhythm. Memory no longer healed, it confused. Priimydia did not panic. He climbed the tree. No one had ever done so. Its bark was stone, its branches not made for hands, but he climbed, slowly, in silence, until he reached the high hollow where no sound returned. He sat for 3 days. He did not eat. He did not pray. On the 4th day, light came, not from above, but from within. He opened his hands, and flame emerged. But it did not burn. It shimmered like memory before speech. It whispered without voice. He took it and held it to his chest and descended. When he returned, the children sang. Their voices returned the pattern. The priests of memory fell silent as he passed. From that day, they began to build not only temples, but laws. Not just from chant, but from clarity. And though he wore no crown, Priimydia became king of flame and reason. Chapter 3. The Gifts That Become Hunger. They did not fall from the sky. They rose from the deep memory of the world. When the Demiurge broke itself into echoes, the 5 realms caught fragments of its intention, not thought, not flesh, but charge. And from those fragments they began to form, not all at once, not in light, but slowly, as alignment bent too long in one direction. First came Isgreen, from the height veins of Isfide, a god of judgment, whose breath smelled of metal, whose voice cracked stone. Then Orson formed from the weight of Orphide, broad-shouldered, unmoving, his skin carved with forgotten covenants. Then Aaron, born of winds and waiting, silent, faceless, watching. Then Paladin, risen from the grieving waters of Pallas, her robes soaked in memory, her eyes leading songs no one remembered teaching her. And last, Ananias, who came without shape, the god of absence, who whispered into the void of naming itself. The people of Priimydia did not summon them, but when they arrived, they were not refused. The gods came bearing gifts. Isgrine gave flame that tempered steel. Orson gave stone that remembered its shape. Aaron gave breath that carried thought across distances. And Paladin gave water that mourned for the drinker. And Ananias gave nothing, only silence. And this made men weep. The priests of memory recorded none of it. They could not. The gods did not speak in chant, and the chambers did not echo their names, but the people accepted the gifts, not in greed, not yet, but in awe. Fields flourished, weapons strengthened, songs carried. The city grew taller, faster. Something ancient beneath the tree bent further. Priimydia watched. He did not forbid the gifts. He could not. But he warned the circle, "Do not build altars to what was never meant to walk beside you." They nodded, and began building altars. The gifts were not stolen, they were given freely and with open hands. The fire of Isgrind was shared with the blacksmiths. The memory stones of Orson passed to the masons. Aaron's whispering wind was captured in copper horns. Paladin's water pooled in quiet wells beneath the city, and even Inanius left marks, not with gifts, but with gaps, in which the artists began to hear themselves. At first, there was only wonder. The markets filled with ironwork that hummed faintly when struck. Messages leapt between cities on spiraled wind plates. Water drawn from Paladin's well tasted of grief, but also of clarity. Children dreamed of light with no source, and so the people gave thanks. They held festivals, not chants, but feasts, music, firelight, painted cloth. Altars arose, not tall, but frequent. One to Isgrind behind the forge, one to Aaron near the spires, one a bowl of silence left outside the Temple of Silence itself. The priests of memory did not interfere. They were not priests of gods, but they began to walk slower. Some began to ask, should not the gods be honored in the Meletheia? Others, could not their names be sung just once for thanks? Priimydica heard. He did not scold, but he left the city more often. He began walking the outer parts, the outer paths, not to forget, but to listen elsewhere. One day he passed a field where the wheat shimmered gold. A farmer bowed and said, Isgrind has blessed the harvest. Priimydica asked, what song did you sing? The farmer looked confused. We did not sing, we poured oil on the stone. Priimydica said nothing, but when he walked away, the wheat did not move in the wind. He returned to the circle of listening that evening and found it empty. In its place, someone had left a statue, not large, but carved with a flame at its crown. Gods had not spoken before, they had only given. But now they watched. They watched who lit fires at which altars. They watched which songs rose from which street. They watched who knelt and who did not. Isgrind's flame flickered higher at certain names. Paladin's wells ran shallower when forgotten. The wind around Aaron's temples grew sharp when chants lapsed. They did not strike, they withheld. A messenger fell silent mid-sentence. A smith's iron refused to cool. One night, a singer found her voice scattered across 3 octaves. No chant would settle her. The priests of memory were asked to intervene. They declined. The Meletheia do not name gods, they said. We preserve what was sung, not what is desired. But desire had taken hold. In the northern tier, a shrine to Orson doubled in size. In the western gardens, a fountain bore Paladin's likeness, weeping stone into water. People began to argue, not about gifts, but about which god loved the city the most. Some said Isgrind, for she gave them strength. Others Aaron, for his wind carried hope. A few claimed Inanius was the truest, for silence is incorruptible. The old spirals of the city became directional. Streets curved toward altars now. Homes built according to the tree's geometry began to warp ever so slightly toward divine centers. Priimydica watched. He was no longer the center, not in anger. In fact, he felt strangely light. He walked alone more often. He whispered the Meletheia into stones and streams as if trying to remind the world of what had come before the gods. But the stones no longer answered. And one evening, as he passed beneath a torch newly lit for Isgrind, he heard a child say, "That is the first flame." The parent corrected him, "No, that is Isgrind's fire. The old king walks in memory." Priimydica did not stop walking, but a bird overhead lost its flight mid-wing beat and fell into the dust at his feet. He buried it in silence. The gods had watched, the gods had waited. Now they began to speak, not in thunder, not in song, but in phrases small enough to believe. Ysgrine spoke first. Her voice was found in the hiss of the forge. Strength is love, to protect is to lead. Orson followed. His voice came through the stones when touched by calloused hands. What is old is owed. Remember the shape of your father's house. Aaron spoke only through wind at thresholds. You are more than breath, you are bridge. Paladin whispered from water drawn in grief. Weep well, for sorrow gives shape to soul. And Inanius, he spoke through nothing, but once a child fell asleep near an empty shrine and woke up speaking truths no one had taught him. The words were not laws, they were comforts. But comforts bend into structure if heard too long. The people began to quote, to inscribe, not the Meletheia, but the words of the gods. Stones were carved, walls painted, feasts opened with recitation. The circle of listening grew quieter. The priests of memory still walked, but fewer listened, and some began to forget what their colors even meant. Priimydica stood beneath the tree, not at its center, but beneath it. He pressed his hand to the bark and whispered the first song. The tree did not reply, but the wind did. It carried a whisper, not from the one, not from the pattern, but from somewhere just adjacent to the memory. Why not lead again? Priimydica turned away, but the whisper returned the next day. Why not lead again? And the next, not with command, but with invitation. For the first time in many years he dreamed, not of what was, but what might yet be done. The gods had spoken, and the city had listened, but the pattern had not. The Meletheia, once clear as stars in rhythm, began to bend. A chant remembered for centuries cracked on its fourth line. A well, blessed with paladin's sorrow, began to hum with a joy no one placed there. Priests of memory adjusted their step. They rechecked the tree's concentric paths. They spoke the old lines with sharper breath, hoping to smooth the edges, but the edges grew teeth. In the temple of silence, the whispering void, once held sacred, began to produce faint syllables, not language, but a suggestion of intent. Inanius was said to be pleased. At the city's southern tier, two boys recited the same Meletheic line, but the air around them responded differently. One's voice deepened, the other fell silent mid-chant, his tongue stilled for a week. No one could explain why. No one could explain it, except to say, the gods listen now, and perhaps the pattern must adapt. Priimydica returned to the chamber of refrain. He entered alone. He sat in its center and said nothing. The chamber whispered. It offered three voices. One was his own, one was the voice of the wind, the third he could not name. He stood, he touched the center stone, and he said aloud, "This is not what we were given." The chamber was still, but one ring on the floor, long unlit, began to glow, not with fire, but with memory scraped raw. The circle of listening met the next morning. Priimydica said only, "The gods have given much, and we are forgetting why we were given anything at all." Then he left, and the birds did not sing that morning, but neither were they silent. They moved their wings without rhythm. Chapter 4. The Council That Broke the Sky. They came not with torches, but with garlands, not with chants, but with requests. At dawn, a procession formed outside the Temple of Earth, not circular, but linear. Each step broke from the city's original spiral, each footfall aligned with desire, not design. At its head stood Anitus, draped in blue ashcloth and silver flame, a former stonecaster. Now, a voice gathered around. He did not declare himself a prophet. He had not declared himself a prophet, but others had. They reached Priimydica's dwelling beneath the western hollow. He was already waiting, and Anitus bowed. "The people are afraid," he said. "The gods speak, but they speak to many, and we need one who remembers the pattern." Priimydica did not answer. "We did not ask for your silence. We asked for your flame." Behind him, children held braziers lit. with Isgrine's fire. A statue of Paladin had been rolled on wheels. One boy carried a slab carved with Orson's verse. What is owed must be returned. Anidas stepped forward. We ask you to wear the crown again, not to rule as before, but to guide in the name of the gods. The Meletheia is cracked. The winds change mid-breath, and the people hunger for direction. Priimydia looked at the stone beneath his feet. He touched it. It did not sing. A crown forged by hunger will not lead to harmony, he said. The gods have given, but I was shaped to listen. Anidas's expression did not change. He stepped aside. Then you leave us to someone else. He did not threaten. He simply turned. The procession followed. Straight paths, forward steps, no spiral, no refrain. And Priimydia stood alone again, but this time not as a guardian, as refusal. It began with one wall. A merchant built it behind his altar to Isgrine, squaring off his corner of the marketplace. He said it was for safety, but it broke the spiral. Then others followed. Gardens were fenced. Spines of stone cut across the tree paths. Streets that had once curved inward to the stone tree now jutted toward altars like roots split and searching. The priests of memory marked the changes in silence. They walked slower. Some stopped walking altogether. The Temple of Wind was relocated, not by priestly decree, but because the shrine to Aaron was better placed for trade winds. The geometry no longer sang. It argued. At dawn one morning, the western quarter raised a stone arch bearing all 5 god symbols woven together. Beneath it, a plaque read, "We are one through the many." No chant accompanied the arch. No alignment had been calculated, but people cheered. By dusk, Priimydia's spiral could no longer be walked without interruption. Stones that once echoed names now returned nothing. A new plaza formed, flat, angular, civic. Priimydia stood at its edge. Children played in chalk, markings shaped like flames and wings. He did not interrupt them. A former architect approached. "This is what you meant, isn't it?" Priimydia said, "No, this is what we were always going to choose." That evening, a torch procession crossed the tree's northern ring. They carried banners bearing the mark of Anidas, a line split by a single flame. They did not announce a secession. They simply stopped, returning to the inner circles. And the stars that night seemed out of place. The circle of listening had once been a place of residence. Now it echoed with interruption. They gathered not by call, but by necessity, priests of memory, interpreters of the gods, artisans, children of flame, even those who still sang alone. No chant opened the council. Only Anidas, rising with a scroll in one hand and a flame in the other. "We must stop pretending memory is enough. The gods have spoken," he said. "The pattern has moved. If we do not move with it, we will be forgotten or broken." A priest stood, robed in earth brown and wind stripes. "The gods cannot contradict the pattern," he said. Anidas replied, "They do not contradict it. They are it. They are it." Awakened, the hall stirred. Another voice from the east side where builders sat. "Then why does Aaron's breath call for bridges while Orson's laws call for walls?" A silence followed. Then more questions, not shouted, but offered like knives. "Why does Paladin's grief silence song when Isgrine's flame demands chorus? Why does Ananias's whisper fall to children, but fall quiet before the Meletheia?" The circle split, not in violence, but in posture. Some rose and walked clockwise, others counter. Anidas did not sing. Anidas did not sit. "There is no longer one pattern. There are 5, he said. and through them choice. He turned to Priimydia, who stood at the end. Say something, before silence becomes surrender. Priimydia looked not at him, but at the stone under their feet. The pattern is not a law, it is a song, and songs do not divide, they are divided, he said. That is not the same, Anidas replied. No, said Priimydia. It is not. No vote was taken, no war was declared, but 3 Meletheia were struck from the wall that night. And in the morning, their words had not returned. Priimydia did not return to the circle. He walked alone past the tree's forgotten roots, to the outer path, the first road, laid not by decree but by faithful wandering. There, in a hollow, where silence had once taught him, he knelt. He did not speak at first. He placed his hands upon the dust, he lowered his brow to the ground, and only then, as dusk burned the stone in amber bright, did he whisper, I will not build altars. I will not call gods by name. I will not lead where longing shouts. I will walk where fire still listens. Behind him, a faint rhythm, not footsteps, a breath, a stillness. A girl, no more than 9, stood watching. She had followed him, but said nothing. In her hand, a char marked reed, burned at one end, once part of the sacred spirals laid by the priests of memory. She pressed it gently into the earth beside him. It used to hum when I touched it, she said. Now it's quiet. He looked at the mark on the reed. Then he gathered dry brush and struck flint beside it, once, then twice, until a small fire caught. The reed warmed. It did not hum, but the silence it left was clean. He turned to her. Would you keep this fire? She nodded. He placed the reed back in her hands. Then he said, Remember not what must be done. Remember what must not be forgotten. She repeated it once, and that was the oath. No title was given, no sign etched, no stone lifted. But that night, a figure walked the spiral paths again, with fire in hand and silence at their side. And another followed, and another. And though no Meletheia rang, the dust beneath their feet remembered. It did not crack like thunder. It sounded like breath held too long, then let go. The stone tree at its lowest arc, where roots met spiral, split, not shattered, not destroyed, but a long, quiet break. Hairline at first, then widening with each season of silence. No one claimed it, no voice took credit, no faction declared victory, but the crown shifted. The outermost temple, once the chamber of listening, tilted by 2 degrees. The wells beneath Paladin's shrine emptied in half a day. Wind through Aaron's arch blew sideways, and then, quietly, without herald or decree, a new city began to build itself on the other side of the split. Stone by stone, in corners with altars already in place, it was not called secession, it was called elsewhere. Priimydia stood at the fault line. The crack ran under his feet as if tracing a choice he had not made. Behind him, 3 firewalkers walked in the spiral in silence. Before him, banners were raised, fire-colored, flame-edged, shaped like wings. A child on the other side shouted, They say you used to rule. Priimydia didn't answer. The ground beneath his feet did. It hummed not in resonance, but in reminder. A low, aching tone that said, This too will become memory. And the dust curled in a wind that carried no voice at all. Chapter 5. The Oath Before the Flame. Stones were set in grids, not spirals. Each corner bore a sigil. Isgrine's flame, Orson's gate, Aaron's eye, Paladin's tear, and Ananias's empty ring. At the center rose a platform of 5 gates, each facing one realm. Above them a single name, the mandate of the 5. Anidas declared it not a temple, but an instruction, not a sanctuary, but a sentence made stone. We were not meant to wander. The gods have made clear what the pattern only implied, he said. He wore no crown, but his word moved faster than sound. He held no title, but each syllable became law. Banners hung from every arch, 5-colored, flame-fringed, symbols set. Children recited daily rites. No one walked the spiral paths, they walked in lines. The old chants were not banned, they were simply no longer needed. We are not bound by memory, Anidas said, but aligned by flame. No one spoke Priimydica's name, but his silence was often referenced. Some would have us kneel to the unknown. Some still wait for resonance, but waiting is how echoes fade, some would say. A new city arose around the mandate. Its roads did not wind, its stones did not sing, but they stood evenly spaced, as if listening had been replaced by arrival. At the far edge of the platform, a gate was left unopened. Its sigil was blank. No one asked why. No one crossed it, not yet. Priimydia walked the old paths. They did not resist him. They no longer remembered him either. Stones had once echoed his step, but now returned only dust. The spiral lines were faint beneath the moss, and children playing nearby used them as game markers, not knowing they had once aligned breath with breath. He passed a well once used for song healing. Now a market had risen around it. At its center, a vendor sold carvings of the gods' faces, each with a name etched below in flame script. He stopped, watched. A child approached with a chant, but it was clipped, flattened, and ornamental. Flame above, something, something, pattern, yes? She laughed and spun. Her friend offered correction. No, it's flame above, speak below. Teach what only fire knows. The girl shrugged. They keep changing them, they complained. No one looked at Priimydia. No one recognized him. At the edge of the market, he found a firewalker, one of the few who still wore no symbol. The boy nodded in silence. They walked together for a time, no chant between them, only rhythm of foot and pause. Eventually, the boy spoke. I forgot the third line of the first oath. Priimydia did not answer. He only stopped and whispered it. The boy repeated it, this time slower. They stood at the circle's rim. The mandate rose in the distance, crisp, perfect, unyielding. They're louder now, the boy said. Priimydia nodded. Then we must remember quieter, he said. They did not move for a while, and beneath them the stones did not echo, but they did not turn away. It began at the center of the mandate. A priest stood before the gates, robes of all 5 colors braided along his arms. His voice was calm, trained. He had led rites before, but today he declared something new. Let them all speak, let their wisdom braid as breath. He raised both hands, and then in sequence, too quick to echo, he invoked them all. Isgrind, flame of judgment, rise. Orson, gate of law, open. Aaron, speak the winds. Paladin, bear our grief. Ananias, hold what must not be named. His breath caught, not because he forgot, but because something answered. For a moment the air rippled, as if 5 winds tried to pass through one door. The banners above the gates twisted inward. The priest gasped and fell silent. Not fainting, not struck down, just silence. His mouth moved. No sound followed. He tried again and again. Each word collapsed before leaving. Anidas was already moving. He crossed the platform, calm as stone. He placed a hand on the priest's shoulder. The gods do not demand blending, he said. They demand clarity. He turned to the gathering crowd and said, let no one fear. The pattern holds, but do not confuse the voices. The banners were lowered. The priest was taken away. Still mute, his name was not spoken again. No song followed, no question asked. But later that night, a firewalker walked past the mandate, and without speaking, he placed 5 stones on the eastern side, 1 for each name, and above them he left a 6th, unmarked. They gathered at the center of the mandate, not for sacrifice, not for chant, for confirmation. Enidas had summoned Priimydica, not by edict, but by story. He walked still, the people said. He listened still. Let him speak or bow, the people said. And so Priimydica came, alone. The platform had been cleared, 5 flame braziers lit. Each god's sigil hovered above the gates. Enidas stood between them, arms outstretched before the gods. We call on the one who kept silence. To kneel is not to surrender, it is alignment, Enidas said. No reply was given. Priimydica stepped forward only once. The braziers flickered. The wind stilled. Enidas lowered his arms. Will you not bow? He asked. Priimydica did not move. He did not speak. He closed his eyes. In the center of the brazier, the shared one, the flame meant to represent all 5, went out, not extinguished, withdrawn. The crowd did not murmur. No shame was shouted. Just air. Still air. Enidas stood very still. He looked at the 4 remaining flames. He said only, then let it be memory. Priimydica turned and walked away. No one followed. But that night, across the eastern rim, 12 firewalkers walked the spiral path in silence, not in defiance, in recognition. And though no stars fell, the wind changed. Just slightly. They did not speak of him after, not because they were forbidden, but because the mandate offered other names, simpler ones, louder ones. Soon, even the children who once traced spirals in dust began drawing flames instead. One girl, youngest of the firewalkers, stopped during evening passage. What do we call the one who walked before? No one answered. Not because they didn't know, but because saying it felt too much. She nodded. Then I will say what he didn't. She pressed her hand to the dust, paused, and took one step forward. The others followed. That night, a chant passed among the spirals, but it had no words, only breath, only the rhythm of a path that once walked, At the mandate, Enidas declared the gates sealed for winter. Rites were recited, flames rekindled, everything sounded complete. But beneath the platform where the spiral once touched the foundation, a crack had begun to widen. Not fast, not loud, just enough for silence to slip through. End of Book 1.